A single rancher rescued two sisters in a blizzard. Now his heart faces an impossible choice. His ranch was a small, sturdy place, surrounded by wide fields, tall pine trees, and mountains that seemed to touch the sky. Snow often fell here in thick blankets, and winter winds could roar across the valley like wild animals. Ethan was used to it. He had lived here for years, and the cold, the snow, and the isolation had become a part of his life. Some people might have thought it lonely, but for Ethan, it was a life filled with purpose and peace. Every morning, Ethan woke before the sun had even risen. He would pull on his thick woolen clothes, wrap a scarf around his neck, and step outside into the crisp air. The snow crunched beneath his boots, and each breath he took sent small clouds of mist into the cold morning air. His first job was always to check on his animals. The cattle needed food, warmth, and water, and Ethan moved among them with care. He knew every cow by sight and sound. Some days, he even whispered their names as he guided them to the barn. Talking to them, even if only in his own voice, gave him a sense of connection and comfort in the vast, quiet valley. After feeding the cattle, Ethan would go to the barn to chop wood. The cabin's fireplace had to be stocked with plenty of firewood, especially in winter, when storms could last for days. He swung his axe with practiced strength, the sound of wood splitting echoing in the stillness of the morning. For Ethan, this was not just work, it was meditation. The rhythm of chopping, the smell of fresh wood, and the satisfaction of a job well done were simple joys that filled his day. Life was not complicated here, and he liked it that way. The ranch itself was small but well-maintained. A modest cabin with a stone chimney stood at the center, and nearby were the barns and animal pens. Ethan had built much of it himself over the years, his hands rough and strong from hard work. Inside, the cabin was cozy. A warm fire always burned in the hearth, and the scent of fresh bread often lingered in the air. Simple furniture, handmade and sturdy, filled the rooms. There were no distractions, no loud noises, no interruptions, just the soft crackle of the fire, the occasional whistle of wind through the trees, and the rhythm of life that Ethan had built for himself. Despite the peacefulness of the valley, Ethan was aware of his solitude. He had grown used to being alone, but sometimes in the quiet evenings he felt a sharp pang of loneliness. The walls of the cabin held many memories, some happy, some bittersweet. He thought of family he had lost, friends who had moved away, and the life he had chosen for himself. In many ways he preferred this life. He was free, independent, and in tune with the natural world around him. But there were moments, often in the deep stillness of the night, when he wished for companionship, someone to share his days and stories with, someone whose voice would warm the silence. Ethan's routine was simple but essential. After checking on his animals and chopping wood, he would tend to small repairs around the ranch. Fences needed fixing, gates needed oiling, and occasionally the roof or barn walls required attention. These chores were not glamorous, but they were necessary for survival, especially during winter. The snow could be harsh, breaking fences, freezing water supplies, or trapping animals in pens. Ethan approached each task methodically, never rushing, always careful. He knew the land, he knew the animals, and he knew the weather. His life depended on these skills, and he took pride in them. On this particular winter morning, the sky was heavy with clouds. The wind carried the promise of a storm, and the air had a sharp, biting edge. Ethan noticed the change immediately. He had lived through many winters and storms, and he could feel the tension in the air. The snow had already started to fall lightly, dusting the trees and the open fields with white. The mountains in the distance were slowly disappearing behind a veil of clouds. It was a familiar feeling, a signal that the valley would soon be covered in a thick, relentless blizzard. Ethan didn't panic. He had prepared for such moments before. He had extra firewood, enough food, and all the necessary supplies. Still, He knew that winter storms could be dangerous, and that every step outside could become a challenge. Ethan paused for a moment and looked around his ranch. The world seemed peaceful, almost serene, but there was a certain tension beneath that calm. The mountains stood like silent guardians, the trees swayed gently in the wind, and the animals moved quietly in their pens. Yet Ethan felt a restlessness in the air, a whisper of danger that he could not ignore. He shook his head slightly and returned to his work. There was always work to do, and work kept the mind focused, kept the heart steady. By mid-morning, the snowfall had grown heavier. The ground was quickly covered in a thick layer of white, and the air was filled with swirling snowflakes. Ethan made his way back to the cabin, his boots sinking slightly into the fresh snow. Inside, the warmth of the fire embraced him, and he removed his coat and gloves, hanging them carefully near the door. The cabin felt like a safe haven, a place where he could rest and prepare for the storm ahead. He brewed a strong cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the small kitchen, and sat by the window to watch the snow fall. Watching the storm was one of his small pleasures. There was something hypnotic about the snow, its quiet persistence, and the way it transformed the world into a soft, white blanket. As Ethan sipped his coffee, he reflected on his life. He had chosen this isolation, this simple existence, and he had no regrets. He knew the value of hard work, the importance of preparation, and the peace that came from being close to nature. Yet deep down, he felt a flicker of something he could not name, a longing for connection, a curiosity about the world beyond the valley, and a hope that perhaps, one day, someone might enter his life and change it in ways he could not imagine. But for now, he was content with the routine, the work, and the quiet companionship of the animals and the land. As the storm approached, the wind grew stronger and the snow began to fall more rapidly. Ethan knew that the day ahead would be challenging, but he welcomed it. There was a certain excitement in preparing for the storm, in testing his skills, and in facing the elements head-on. He checked the animals once more, making sure they had enough food and water, and then secured the barn doors. Everything was in place, and the ranch was ready for whatever the blizzard might bring. Ethan felt a sense of satisfaction and calm. This was his world, his life, and he was ready to meet it, no matter what came. Evening began to fall, and the storm showed no signs of slowing. The snow piled up quickly, covering the ground, the fences, and the roofs. The wind howled through the trees, and the valley became a world of white, cold, and silence, broken only by the occasional crack of ice or the low murmur of the animals. Ethan stood by the cabin door, looking out into the storm, feeling both a sense of awe and a quiet apprehension. He knew that winter could be harsh and unforgiving, but he also knew that he was prepared, capable, and resilient. Life on the ranch was not easy, but it was honest, meaningful, and deeply rewarding. As the first night of the storm set in, Ethan lit extra candles, checked the firewood, and made sure everything was secure. The warmth of the cabin and the steady presence of the fire brought comfort. Outside, the blizzard raged, but inside there was safety, peace, and a small sense of triumph. Ethan settled into his chair by the fire, listening to the storm, feeling the rhythm of his life, and thinking about the days ahead. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring more work, more challenges, and perhaps even unexpected events. But for tonight, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection, enjoying the stillness, the warmth, and the life he had built in the heart of the snow-covered valley. The blizzard arrived with a sudden intensity that seemed almost alive. The sky, once gray and heavy, turned into a swirling wall of white, and the wind whipped across the valley with an almost furious strength. Snow fell thick and fast, reducing visibility to mere feet. Trees bent under the weight of snow, their branches groaning and snapping in protest. The cold cut through every layer of clothing, and the landscape was transformed into an unrecognizable world of white, with shadows and shapes blurred by the storm. Ethan Harper, standing by the window of his cabin, watched the snow swirl in patterns that were both mesmerizing and dangerous. He could hear the distant howl of the wind, carrying with it the raw power of the storm, and he knew that it would be a long, relentless night. Meanwhile, not far from the valley, two young sisters, Lily and Emma, were struggling to survive in the blinding snow. Their family had been traveling across the mountains, planning a short visit to relatives on the other side of the valley. Their car, a small, aging vehicle, had become trapped in a patch of snow and ice. The engine had stalled, and try as they might, the girls' parents could not get it started again. Panic had set in as the storm intensified, and soon the family realized that they could not continue. The snow was too deep, the wind too strong, and the temperature was dropping at a dangerous rate. In the chaos, Lily and Emma had been separated from their parents during a desperate attempt to seek help, leaving the sisters alone and terrified. The girls huddled together beneath a thin tree, its branches offering little protection from the cold. Their clothes were wet, their fingers numb, and their teeth chattered uncontrollably. Every gust of wind seemed to cut through their small jackets and scarves, reminding them of how powerless they were in the vast, snow-covered wilderness. Lily, the older of the two at 12 years old, tried to stay calm for the sake of Emma, who was only 8. "We'll be okay," she whispered repeatedly, more to convince herself than to reassure her younger sister. But deep down, fear gnawed at her heart. The storm was relentless, and the valley around them seemed endless and dangerous. Back at the ranch, Ethan noticed subtle signs of distress in the storm. The wind shifted unpredictably, snowdrifts formed rapidly, and he sensed something unusual in the valley beyond his property. He had lived here long enough to read the land like a map. Something was moving, faint but deliberate, across the snow. At first, he thought it might be an animal, perhaps a lost deer or a wandering coyote. But then he heard it, a distant cry barely audible over the roar of the wind. He froze, straining to listen. There it was again, a faint, desperate sound. Someone was in trouble. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed his thick coat, pulled on his gloves, and stepped out into the blizzard, knowing that any delay could be dangerous. The snow was already knee-deep as he trudged across his property. Each step was a struggle, the cold biting through layers of clothing, the wind threatening to push him backward. His eyes squinted against the storm, searching for movement. And then he saw them, a small figure struggling against the wind, almost invisible in the snow. Ethan's heart tightened at the sight. Two young girls were trying to make their way through the storm, their small bodies trembling, their faces pale and frozen with cold. Without thinking twice, Ethan sprinted toward them, calling out in a loud, steady voice, "Hey, over here. Come this way." The girls paused, startled at the sound of a human voice in the emptiness of the storm. It took minutes that felt like hours for Ethan to reach them. He pushed through the snow, finally reaching Lily and Emma, who were shivering uncontrollably, their eyes wide with fear. "You're safe now," he said gently, wrapping his thick coat around both girls. They clung to him instinctively, seeking warmth and reassurance. "We'll get you out of this," Ethan added, his voice calm but urgent. The sisters could barely speak, their lips blue, their small bodies shaking violently. Ethan realized the danger they were in. If they stayed outside any longer, hypothermia could set in, and the storm showed no sign of slowing. Time was critical. Carrying Lily under one arm and holding Emma close with the other, Ethan began the difficult journey back to his cabin. Every step was a struggle. The snow was deep, and the wind threatened to knock them off balance. The storm pressed down on them from every side, a wall of cold and white, but Ethan's determination was stronger than the blizzard. He focused on each step, keeping his balance, keeping the girls safe, and keeping his mind steady. He could feel their tiny bodies trembling against him, and he whispered words of comfort as they moved. "Almost there, just a little more, you're safe now." His voice carried over the storm, a lifeline of hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan reached his cabin. The door opened with a creak and warmth rushed out to meet them. The fire he had tended earlier glowed invitingly, and the smell of wood smoke and warmth enveloped the girls immediately. Ethan set them down carefully on a soft rug in front of the fireplace. He removed his coat and gloves, covering them with blankets and handing them hot tea from a small kettle. The girls drank slowly, their small hands cupping the warm mugs, and for the first time in hours, they felt a sense of relief and safety. Lily's eyes met Ethan's, filled with gratitude and wonder. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Emma simply clung to her sister, her small face pressed into the warmth of the blanket. Ethan watched them for a moment, letting the fire's warmth seep into his own chilled body. He had faced many challenges in his life on the ranch, but helping the girls had brought a new kind of urgency and purpose. He realized how fragile life could be in such conditions, how quickly a situation could turn from normal to dangerous. And yet, despite the storm outside, the cabin felt like a sanctuary. For the first time that day, Ethan allowed himself a deep breath, knowing he had made a difference in their lives. As the girls began to regain some warmth and composure, they shared small bits of their story. Their parents had gone back to the car to try and get help, but the storm had caught them off guard. They had been separated in the chaos, and the girls had wandered into the snow, searching for shelter. Ethan listened carefully, nodding, his eyes scanning the blizzard outside the window. The storm was still fierce, and he knew they could not leave until it passed. "You're safe here," he reassured them. "We'll stay inside until the storm calms. No one will hurt you and we'll keep you warm." The girls nodded, trusting his words despite their exhaustion and fear. Hours passed, and the storm continued its relentless assault on the valley. Outside, the world was a blur of white, with snowdrifts forming rapidly and the wind howling through the trees. Inside the cabin, however, there was a small sense of peace. The fire crackled, the girls huddled under blankets, and Ethan prepared a simple meal to keep their strength up. They ate quietly, the warmth of the cabin and the kindness of their rescuer slowly easing their fear. Conversation was minimal, but the presence of someone who cared made all the difference. For Lily and Emma, this simple act of kindness meant the difference between despair and hope. As evening fell, the storm showed no sign of stopping, and Ethan realized that the girls would have to stay the night. He helped them prepare a small corner of the cabin for rest, making sure they had enough blankets and were comfortable near the fire. The sisters were exhausted, their eyelids heavy, but they were safe, and that was what mattered most. Ethan sat nearby, keeping watch, listening to the storm outside and reflecting on the fragility and resilience of life. He understood in that quiet moment that sometimes courage was not about strength or skill alone, but about the willingness to act when someone's life was at risk. Through the long night, the cabin became a haven from the storm. The girls slept, slowly recovering from the chill and fear of the blizzard, while Ethan stayed awake, listening to the wind and ensuring that the fire remained strong. Every so often, he would check on the girls, adjusting blankets or offering a warm drink. Outside, the storm raged on, relentless and unforgiving, but inside there was warmth, safety, and a quiet bond forming between a solitary rancher and the two young girls whose lives he had saved. By the time the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, the storm had begun to soften. The snow still covered the valley, thick and unbroken, but the wind had calmed. Ethan stepped outside briefly to survey the landscape, feeling a sense of relief. The girls were safe, alive, and slowly recovering. Their parents were likely still trying to reach help, and Ethan knew that soon the family would be reunited. But for now, he focused on the small miracle of survival, the warmth of the cabin, and the simple joy of having made a difference when it mattered most. Ethan Harper watched the two sisters huddled near the fire, their small bodies wrapped tightly in blankets, their faces slowly regaining color after hours in the freezing storm. The cabin, though modest and small, felt like a sanctuary against the blizzard that still raged outside. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows and whipping the snow into sharp drifts, but inside, warmth and safety reigned. Ethan moved quietly around the cabin, careful not to disturb the girls as he prepared a small meal. The smell of hot soup and fresh bread began to fill the air, bringing a comforting sense of normalcy after the chaos of the storm. The girls stirred slightly as the aroma reached them. Lily, the older sister, opened her eyes first, blinking at the bright light of the fire. She turned toward Ethan, her face pale but hopeful. Are we really safe?" she asked, her voice weak but steady. Ethan nodded with a reassuring smile. "Yes, you're safe now. You're warm and nothing out there can hurt you while you're here." Emma, still half asleep, clung to her sister, her small fingers curling into Lily's coat. Ethan knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on each of their shoulders. "We're going to get through this together," he said softly. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." After helping the girls sit comfortably at a small wooden table, Ethan set down bowls of hot soup and slices of bread. Their hands, still cold from the storm, shook slightly as they picked up the spoons. Each bite brought them warmth, nourishment, and a sense of relief that slowly replaced the fear that had dominated the past hours. Lily looked up at Ethan with gratitude, her voice trembling. "Thank you for saving us. We didn't think anyone would come." Ethan gave her a kind smile. "It's my job to help anyone in trouble. That's what living out here teaches you sometimes. You have to step in when someone needs help." As the girls ate, Ethan kept glancing toward the door and the windows, aware that the storm could still worsen. He had lived through many blizzards, and he knew that even a moment of inattention could have serious consequences. Yet, seeing the sisters slowly regain warmth and strength brought him a deep sense of satisfaction. He realized that life on the ranch had always been solitary, but moments like these, when one could make a real difference in someone's life, gave meaning beyond the routine work of feeding animals and chopping wood. Once they had eaten, Ethan led the girls to a corner of the cabin he had prepared as a sleeping area. He laid down extra blankets and arranged small pillows to make it as comfortable as possible. Lily and Emma looked at the cozy setup with relief and awe. "It's so warm and safe," Emma whispered, her voice soft with exhaustion. Ethan nodded, kneeling to tuck the blankets around them. "Rest now. You've been through a lot today and your bodies need to recover. The storm will pass and by morning things will look much better." The girls nodded, their eyelids growing heavy, and soon they drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep. With the girls resting, Ethan finally allowed himself to take a moment to breathe. He moved to the window and peered out into the blizzard. The valley was a white, chaotic expanse, with snow drifting across the fields and trees bending under the wind. Even in the harshest moments, Ethan could not help but admire the raw beauty of the landscape. The storm, powerful and relentless, had a way of transforming the world into something extraordinary, a place where survival required strength, courage, and care. And tonight, he had been able to offer that care to two innocent lives, keeping them safe when the elements were so cruel. As the night progressed, Ethan kept a careful watch over the girls. Every so often, he would check the fire, add more wood, or gently stir the soup to keep it warm for when they awoke. He could hear their soft breathing, rhythmic and steady, and it reminded him of the fragility of life, especially in such harsh conditions. He reflected on the storm and how quickly circumstances could turn dangerous. One moment, life seemed ordinary and routine. The next, survival became a challenge, and courage was measured not in grand acts, but in small, decisive actions taken at the right moment. During these quiet hours, Ethan found himself thinking about the girls' bravery. Even in fear and exhaustion, they had stayed together, supporting each other and moving forward despite the overwhelming storm. He admired their resilience and quiet strength, qualities that were rare and precious. And in this admiration, a subtle connection began to form. Though he had always been a solitary man, used to relying only on himself, the presence of the girls sparked a warmth in his heart that he had not felt in years. It was a gentle, comforting feeling, born not of desire, but of genuine care and responsibility. When morning finally arrived, the storm had calmed, leaving the valley blanketed in pristine snow. Sunlight, weak but steady, filtered through the clouds, casting a soft glow over the landscape. Ethan stepped outside briefly to assess the world beyond his cabin. Snow covered every fence, tree, and field, sparkling like diamonds in the early light. Tracks crisscrossed the snow, reminders of the night's chaos, but the world felt peaceful, almost magical, compared to the violence of the blizzard hours earlier. Ethan took a deep breath of the crisp, cold air, feeling a sense of relief and accomplishment. The girls had survived the night, and now it was time to help them recover fully. Back inside, Ethan found Lily and Emma stirring, their faces showing signs of life and energy returning after a long, exhausting night. Lily yawned and stretched, blinking sleep from her eyes, while Emma rubbed her hands together, feeling the warmth return. Ethan smiled, offering them a fresh cup of tea and some bread. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "You slept well, I hope." The girls nodded, smiling faintly, still shy but clearly relieved to be safe. "We feel much better now," Lily said softly. "Thanks to you," Ethan patted her shoulder gently. "You both were very brave. I'm just glad I could help." As the day progressed, Ethan helped the girls adjust to the cabin and the ranch environment. He showed them how to safely drink hot water without spilling it, how to stay warm even when the wind howled outside, and how to move carefully over the icy floors. The girls learned quickly, absorbing every instruction with quiet determination. Ethan realized that they were adaptable, smart, and eager to learn, qualities that made him respect them even more. Small moments, like helping them wash their hands, tying their scarves tightly, and teaching them to move carefully in heavy snow, became shared experiences that deepened the sense of trust and connection between them. The afternoon was spent in quiet activity. Ethan prepared another meal, this time using ingredients stored in the cabin for emergencies. The girls helped by passing utensils, stirring the pot under careful supervision, and learning the basics of preparing a simple meal. Their faces lit up with small smiles as they realized they were capable of helping, even in this strange, isolated place. Ethan watched them with a mixture of pride and admiration. In many ways, the cabin had become more than a shelter. It was a small world of learning, warmth, and human connection that had sprung up amid the harshness of the storm. By evening, the sisters were starting to recover physically, their strength returning slowly as warmth and nourishment restored them. Ethan took them outside briefly, showing them the snow-covered landscape. The valley was transformed by the storm, pristine and silent except for the crunch of their boots in the snow. The girls' faces lit up with wonder, their fear replaced by amazement at the beauty around them. "It's like a winter wonderland," Emma said softly, her eyes wide. Ethan smiled, feeling a small joy at seeing their spirits lifted. He realized that sometimes beauty could be found even in the harshest moments, and that life, though unpredictable, had the capacity for wonder and awe. As night fell again, Ethan prepared a small sleeping area for the girls near the fire. He tucked them in with extra blankets and pillows, ensuring that they were comfortable and safe. "You'll be warm tonight," he said, his voice gentle. "Rest well, and tomorrow we'll see what we can do to help your family." Lily and Emma nodded, their eyes heavy with sleep. Ethan sat nearby, keeping watch as he had the night before, aware of the importance of vigilance and care. Outside, the wind had calmed, but the valley remained blanketed in snow, a reminder of the storm's power and the fragility of life in such conditions. Throughout the night, Ethan reflected on the events of the past hours. The storm had brought fear, danger, and uncertainty, but it had also brought connection, purpose, and courage. Saving the sisters had not been easy, but it had been meaningful in a way that no routine day on the ranch could match. He realized that life sometimes presented unexpected challenges that tested not only physical strength, but also the heart, the ability to care for others, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. By the time dawn arrived, Ethan knew that the sisters were safe, healthy, and beginning to trust him. He had created not just a safe space, but also a bond, fragile but growing, that would shape the days ahead. This was only the beginning of their time together, and he felt a quiet anticipation for what the future might hold. For now, however, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had made a difference when it mattered most, and that the warmth, safety, and care he had provided had given two young girls a chance to survive a night they would never forget. The storm had passed, leaving the valley in a soft, shimmering white. Snow lay thick on the ground, blanketing the trees, fences, and fields like a giant quilt. The morning sun, weak but steady, reflected off the snow, casting a calm light across the landscape. Ethan Harper stepped outside briefly, breathing in the crisp air, feeling both relief and a strange sense of anticipation. The girls were safe, and the world seemed peaceful again. But he knew that the days ahead would be more than just about surviving the storm. They would be about building trust, understanding, and connection. Inside the cabin, Lily and Emma were stirring. Their sleep had been deep, restorative, and unbroken for the first time since the blizzard began. Lily rubbed her eyes and stretched, glancing at Ethan with gratitude and curiosity. "It's beautiful outside," she said softly, her voice full of wonder. Emma, her younger sister, clutched her blanket and nodded. "Can we go see the snow?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Yes, but carefully," he said. "The snow is deep and you need to walk slowly." "I'll be right there with you." The girls quickly finished breakfast, their energy returning, and together they stepped out into the valley. The snow was almost waist-deep in places, and each step was an adventure. The girls laughed as they tried to balance and avoid slipping, their excitement mixing with the crisp air and sparkling snow. Ethan guided them patiently, showing them safe paths and pointing out landmarks so they would not get lost. "Look over there," he said, pointing to a small group of pine trees bent under the snow's weight. "See how the snow clings to the branches? That's how the trees survive the winter. They hold the snow carefully so it doesn't break them." The girls listened intently, fascinated by the world they had never known. For them, the snow was not just a challenge. It was magic, a new and exciting place where the rules of their ordinary world no longer applied. Back inside the cabin, the day unfolded with simple but meaningful tasks. Ethan taught the girls how to help with the animals. Lily was cautious but determined, learning to feed the chickens and check on the cows. Emma was smaller and less confident, but she followed Ethan's instructions carefully, feeling proud every time she succeeded. The girls were learning quickly, and Ethan found himself impressed by their curiosity, bravery, and willingness to try new things. Every small task became an opportunity to connect, to teach, and to build trust. By mid-afternoon, Ethan decided to take a break from chores and focus on something different. He suggested they explore the area near the cabin, a small clearing that offered a view of the valley and distant mountains. The girls eagerly agreed, wrapping themselves in extra scarves and coats. They walked together, the snow crunching beneath their boots, the sun reflecting off the frozen landscape. Ethan shared stories of past winters, of snowstorms he had faced alone, and of the challenges and joys of ranch life. The girls listened, captivated, and occasionally asked questions, eager to understand the life of the man who had saved them. As the day passed, The bond between Ethan and the girls grew stronger. Lily, with her natural curiosity and maturity, often asked questions about the ranch, the animals, and the mountains. Ethan answered with patience and care, his voice calm and steady. Emma, though quieter, was attentive and eager to learn, following her sister's example. In moments like these, Ethan realized that he was not just protecting them physically, he was guiding them, teaching them, and offering them stability in a world that had suddenly become dangerous and unpredictable. Evenings were quiet and reflective. After dinner, the three would sit by the fire, sharing stories, talking about their lives, and enjoying the warmth of the cabin. Lily sometimes spoke of her school, her friends, and the life she had left behind, while Emma listened and nodded, occasionally adding small comments or questions. Ethan shared his own stories too, not about loneliness or sorrow, but about the beauty and challenge of life on the ranch. The girls listened with fascination, realizing that this man, who seemed so strong and self-reliant, also had a gentle heart and a capacity for care that went far beyond their expectations. Yet beneath the surface of these calm and joyful moments, Ethan felt a quiet tension building within himself. The girls were growing more comfortable around him, trusting him in ways that warmed his heart. But he also began to notice something unexpected, an emotional connection, subtle but undeniable, that went beyond the responsibility of keeping them safe. He found himself thinking about Lily, the older sister, in ways that surprised him. It was not just concern or care. It was a strange and gentle admiration, a feeling that made him question the boundaries of his own emotions. He knew he had to be careful, that his role was to protect, guide, and support, and nothing more. Yet the heart is not always easily controlled, and Ethan felt a quiet struggle within himself. Over the next few days, the snow continued to blanket the valley, though the storm had passed. Ethan and the girls settled into a routine, each day filled with simple tasks, lessons, and small adventures. They learned to navigate the snow safely, to help with feeding animals, and to appreciate the quiet beauty of life on the ranch. At night, they would gather by the fire, sharing stories, laughing, and finding comfort in each other's presence. The bond that had begun in fear and desperation was growing into something stronger, something meaningful, and Ethan felt both joy and unease as he watched it develop. The girls' presence brought a light into Ethan's life that he had not realized he was missing. He had grown accustomed to solitude, to the rhythm of his own life, and to the quiet companionship of animals and nature. But these two young girls had introduced a new energy, a sense of purpose and connection that went beyond mere survival. He found himself anticipating their questions, their laughter, and even their small frustrations, feeling a warmth in his heart that was both comforting and challenging. One evening, as the three sat by the fire, Ethan noticed a moment of quiet intimacy that made his heart tighten. Lily had been sharing a story about a friend from school, and Emma was listening closely. Ethan watched their faces, the way they interacted, the trust and admiration in their eyes, and he realized just how much responsibility he had taken on, not just for their safety, but for their emotional well-being. It was a weight he accepted willingly, even as it stirred feelings he had not expected. He knew he had to remain steady, to guide them with care, and to make decisions that were right, even if they challenged his own desires or emotions. In these moments, Ethan began to understand the true meaning of connection. It was not simply about companionship or affection. It was about responsibility, trust, and the quiet courage it took to care for others. The girls had survived a night in the blizzard because of him, and now they were relying on him to guide them, to teach them, and to offer a safe and nurturing presence. He felt proud, humbled, and deeply aware of the delicate balance of his role. Each day brought new lessons, small victories, and the gradual strengthening of the bond between them. The days passed in a rhythm that was both comforting and demanding. Ethan and the girls learned to work together seamlessly, to anticipate each other's needs, and to find joy in the simplest activities. They would gather firewood, prepare meals, check on animals, and explore the snow-covered landscape, each task a shared experience that reinforced trust and connection. Even in moments of exhaustion or difficulty, there was a sense of satisfaction and purpose that made every challenge worthwhile. Yet, despite the growing sense of warmth and connection, Ethan's heart carried a quiet unease. He had begun to feel a subtle and confusing emotional attachment, particularly toward Lily, that he could not easily name or ignore. It was not a feeling he intended to pursue, but it was there nonetheless, a mixture of admiration, care, and a gentle affection that he knew he could not act upon. He reminded himself constantly that his responsibility was to protect and guide, nothing more, and that his feelings must never compromise the safety or well-being of the girls. By the end of the week, the storm's effects had fully settled. The valley was peaceful again, the snow sparkling in the sunlight, and the girls had regained their strength and confidence. Their parents, who had been trying to reach them through emergency services, were expected soon, and Ethan knew that the time to say goodbye was approaching. Yet in these final days together, a deep bond had been formed, a connection that would remain, even as circumstances required separation. Ethan reflected on the lessons of the past week, the courage it took to act in danger, the strength found in connection, and the quiet resilience of the human spirit. Though the future was uncertain, Ethan felt a quiet sense of hope. The girls had survived, learned, and grown stronger, and he had provided them with safety, guidance, and care. In turn, they had reminded him of the importance of compassion, patience, and emotional connection. And while his heart carried feelings he could not fully act upon, he understood that true courage sometimes meant putting others first, making difficult choices, and embracing the responsibility that comes with love and care. The valley was calm, almost serene, as Ethan Harper stepped outside his cabin early that morning. The snow, untouched and sparkling, reflected the soft light of dawn. The storm that had tested their strength and courage was finally gone, leaving behind a world of quiet beauty. Ethan took a deep breath of the crisp air, feeling the tension of the past week slowly ease from his shoulders. For days, he had protected, guided, and cared for two young sisters who had been stranded in the blizzard. Now the moment he had both anticipated and dreaded had arrived. The girls' family would soon reach the ranch. Inside the cabin, Lily and Emma were already awake. Their faces, bright and refreshed after a restful night, held a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The thought of being reunited with their parents filled them with joy, but there was also a small pang of worry. They had grown accustomed to the safety and warmth of the cabin, to the steady presence of Ethan, and to the quiet rhythm of life on the ranch. The bond they had formed with him over the past days was strong, built on trust, care, and shared experiences. They both felt a deep gratitude for the man who had risked so much to save them. Ethan joined them for breakfast, the three of them eating quietly but comfortably. The warmth of the fire, the aroma of freshly brewed tea, and the simple satisfaction of a meal shared created a moment of calm and reflection. Lily looked at Ethan, her eyes shining with unspoken emotion. "Thank you for everything," she said softly. Ethan smiled, his heart tightening. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "I'm just glad you're safe and well." Emma reached over and squeezed Ethan's hand, a small gesture of trust and affection that spoke volumes. Ethan's heart swelled with a mixture of pride, relief, and the bittersweet awareness that their time together was drawing to an end. By mid-morning, distant voices could be heard, faint but growing louder. The girls' parents were approaching the cabin, guided by emergency services and concerned neighbors who had tracked the blizzard's aftermath. Ethan stepped outside to meet them, his tall figure framed against the sparkling snow. The parents, weary and anxious from their search, broke into relieved smiles the moment they saw their daughters safe and sound. Lily and Emma ran toward them, their laughter mingling with tears of joy, and were quickly enveloped in warm embraces. The reunion was heartfelt, emotional, and beautiful, a moment that seemed to suspend time amid the sparkling valley. Ethan watched the scene quietly, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was joy in seeing the family reunited, relief in knowing the girls were safe, and satisfaction in having fulfilled his duty as protector. But beneath it all was a quiet ache in his heart, a recognition of the bond that had formed, and the subtle feelings he had developed over the past days. He had grown attached, especially to Lily, in ways that were tender and unexpected. Yet he knew the proper course was clear. His role had always been to protect, guide, and care, and now that the family had returned, he must step back gracefully. The parents approached Ethan, their faces filled with gratitude. "We can't thank you enough," their mother said, her voice shaking slightly. "You saved our daughters. Words cannot express how grateful we are." Ethan nodded modestly. "I just did what anyone should do," he replied. "I'm glad they're safe." The father extended his hand, which Ethan shook firmly. "You've shown courage and kindness that we'll never forget," he said. "You're a part of our family story now." Ethan felt a deep warmth at their words, a quiet affirmation that the bond he had formed, though brief, was meaningful and lasting. As the family began to prepare to leave the ranch and return home, Lily and Emma lingered for a moment, reluctant to part from the man who had been their guardian and friend. Lily stepped forward first, her small hand reaching for Ethan's. "Will we ever see you again?" she asked softly, her eyes searching his. Ethan knelt slightly to meet her gaze, his heart heavy but steady. "I don't know what the future holds," he said gently, "but I promise you'll always have a friend in me. I'll never forget you, and I hope you won't forget me either." Emma hugged his leg tightly, whispering a quiet thank you, and Ethan felt a lump in his throat, the bittersweet ache of goodbye settling in. The ride back to their car was slow and careful, guided by the adults and supported by neighbors who had joined the search. Ethan watched as the girls climbed into the vehicle, their faces pressed to the windows, waving goodbye. The engine roared to life, and slowly the car began to move, taking them back to their family and the world beyond the snow-covered valley. Ethan stood on the porch, watching until the car disappeared from sight, leaving behind only the pristine snow and the quiet stillness of the ranch. He felt a mixture of emptiness, fulfillment, and a strange, tender longing. He had done what he could, saved lives, offered warmth, and formed a meaningful bond, and now life would return to its usual rhythm. Once the family had gone, Ethan returned to the cabin, feeling the quiet weight of solitude settle around him. The warmth of the fire was comforting, yet it could not fill the emptiness left by the girls' absence. He moved through the cabin slowly, checking the animals, feeding the cattle, and performing small tasks that helped occupy his mind. Each action was familiar, routine, and grounding, but the memory of the girls lingered in every corner. Their laughter, their curiosity, and the gentle bond that had grown over the past days. Ethan realized that while the storm had tested his strength, it had also reminded him of the profound value of human connection, even in a life that often felt solitary. As evening approached, Ethan stepped outside once more. The valley, bathed in the soft glow of sunset, was peaceful and still. Snow sparkled in the fading light, and the mountains loomed silently in the distance. Ethan took a deep breath, reflecting on the past week, the storm, the danger, the rescue, and the unexpected bonds that had formed. He understood that life was full of unpredictable moments, moments that required courage, selflessness, and emotional strength. He also understood that sometimes the heart faced impossible choices, and the true measure of character was in how those choices were met. Though Ethan's heart carried a quiet ache for the bond he had formed with Lily, he accepted the reality of the situation. She was a child, and her safety and family's love were paramount. He reminded himself that his feelings, though tender and real, must remain secondary to the responsibilities he had fulfilled. True care, he realized, was often about sacrifice, placing others' well-being above personal desire. He felt a deep sense of pride, knowing that in those critical hours he had acted with courage, compassion, and integrity. Night fell over the valley, the stars twinkling faintly through a clear sky. Ethan stood on the porch of his cabin, gazing at the horizon. The wind had softened, carrying a gentle whisper through the trees. In the quiet, he allowed himself to reflect on the lessons of the past days. The strength found in action, the warmth of human connection, and the courage it took to protect and care for those who could not protect themselves. The girls' laughter, trust, and resilience remained etched in his memory, a reminder of the impact one person can have when they act with bravery and heart. Ethan returned inside, stoking the fire and preparing for a night of rest. The cabin was quiet, but it was filled with a lingering sense of meaning. The valley, though cold and often harsh, had witnessed an act of courage and kindness that would remain in Ethan's heart forever. Though the girls were gone, their presence had changed him, reminding him of the beauty and importance of care, connection, and selflessness. The ache of longing, though present, was tempered by the knowledge that he had done what was right, and that sometimes the heart's impossible choices required patience, restraint, and quiet strength. As he settled into his chair by the fire, Ethan allowed himself a small, contented smile. The world outside was calm, the snow glimmering like a promise, and his heart, though quietly heavy, was full of the satisfaction of knowing he had saved lives, built trust, and offered warmth in the harshest of conditions. The bond formed with Lily and Emma, though fleeting in time, was permanent in memory. He understood that life would continue, the seasons would change, and the valley would once again demand his attention, work, and courage. But the memory of the girls, the shared laughter, and the courage displayed in the blizzard would remain with him, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of kindness. In the quiet of the night, with the fire crackling and the snow-covered valley outside, Ethan Harper closed his eyes and reflected on the impossible choice he had faced, not a choice of action, but a choice of the heart. He had acted with integrity, courage, and compassion. He had loved in his own way without overstepping boundaries, and had given two young girls the gift of safety, warmth, and trust. Though the ache of separation remained, he knew he had done what was right, and in that there was peace.